guys ever felt you've made a mistake too big to be forgiven? That you've messed up so big that no gift, no amount of penance, no request can ever be big enough to deserve forgiveness. Titus 3:5 says that Christ saved us not because of righteous works, but because of his mercy and the washing and renewal of the Holy Spirit. My story speaks much of this. You may not know my name, you may not even know who I am, but I am sure you've heard of me. My story is found in Luke 7:36 through 50. I am the woman who anointed Jesus at Bethany. I'm going to begin from the beginning because that makes the most sense to me. To start off, I am known throughout Bethany, my hometown, as a sinful woman. The words irreputable, distasteful, disgusting, dirty, and sometimes prostitute are used to describe me. But I had heard about this man named Jesus. I had heard what he had to say. And he talked about forgiveness and offering salvation to people who had made mistakes. People like me. And I knew I had to see him. If he ever came, I needed to go and see him. And then I had heard he was coming. He was going to go to Simon the Pharisee's house for dinner. And I knew I had to go. So I went and I got my alabaster jar. I remember when I bought this jar. I remember thinking, what am I ever going to use this for? But it's the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And it was the most expensive thing I owned. And I knew that there had to be a purpose. And then when I heard he was coming, I knew what the purpose was. I knew it was for him. So I went. And I remember standing in the courtyard of the house and looking in and saying to myself, I can do this. I can do this. They're only eating dinner. This isn't for me. This isn't about them. It's about him. You guys know what I'm talking about. When you make a decision and you're really nervous, and so you sit there and you talk yourself up. You say, I can do this, like the little engine that could. That was me. I was the little engine that was going to. And so I remember just standing there. I knew what I was going into. I had heard it all my life, since I was young. I was the one to be looked down upon. I was the one who'd made mistakes, made bad decisions, done everything wrong in the book, and I deserved to be scorned and shamed. I knew going into this that everyone in that room would be better than I was. I would be like a mouse in a den of vipers. They would be ready to attack at any moment. But I knew I had to go in. I knew I had to thank him. This was the least he deserved, but I had to give it to him anyway. And so I went in. I pushed on. And I remember as I walked in the room, the looks on everyone's faces. The looks on the women's faces that said, who can I tell first that she's here? And the looks on the men's faces that said, how fast can I get away from her so I'm not associated with her? Everybody looked at me as if I didn't deserve to be there. Because in honesty, I didn't. But as I walked in and I walked across the room, I remember I saw him. I saw him. There was this man, here he was going to offer me a new life, offer me forgiveness when I was the least to deserve it. And I knew I had to thank him. So I walked across the room, and as I walked and I saw him, I began to cry. Cry's the wrong word. I began to weep. I couldn't hold in my thankfulness anymore. I have spent my life being torn down, being told I had no worth, and this man saw something. He knew something. And as I got to his feet, I fell at his presence. Who was I to stand in his presence? And I began to cry on his feet. And realizing I had cried, I had no towel, I had nothing. And so I took all of my hair and I dried his feet. It was the least I could do. And I began to kiss him and thank him in love and in respect and in thankfulness for what he was going to do. And as I began to kiss his feet, I remembered my jar. And I picked up that jar that I had, and I opened the top, and I poured all of the perfume I had onto his feet, every last drop. And I anointed him, and I thanked him. I knew the reaction this would get, and without missing a beat, it came. First, in whispers, and then it became louder and broader around the room. They weren't ashamed to say it. They never had been. See, you guys know how it goes. When people think they're being sneaky and they think you don't know that they're talking about you, but you really know, that was them. It was the owner of the house himself who was not ashamed to say it. He turned to Jesus and he said, if this man was a prophet, he would know what woman touches him, that she is a sinner. But the way he said it was as if I was the worst creature to ever walk the earth. And at that moment, I felt the scorn and shame of 1,000 years. But something different happened, because it didn't matter what they thought. Their reaction didn't matter to me. I waited for him, because this was about him. And then he turned to Simon, and he asked this question. He told a story. He said 2 men owed a debt to a moneylender. One owed 500 denarii. The other owed 50. Seeing that both debtors couldn't pay, the moneylender canceled both debts. Now, who will love him more? And I remember looking at Simon, thinking about this moment, thinking of the look on his face and him wondering what this has to do with this situation. The answer was obvious to me in a moment. I was the debtor. I was the one who had the greatest debt. Everyone else in that room had made good decisions. They had made good choices. They had status, and they were looked at as valuable. My debt didn't deserve to be canceled. But he had offered for my debt to be canceled, and I loved him all the more for it. And so I sat there, and I remember, as I had heard this, I just couldn't help but think everyone in this room is far greater than I. Everyone else deserves the forgiveness, but they didn't see that. And I remember my thankfulness. And I sat there and I waited for Simon to answer. And Simon looked at Jesus with this smug look, because he knew the answer. And he said, well, I suppose the one who had the biggest debt canceled. And Jesus looked at him and he said, you have chosen correctly. And then he looked down at me. I mean, he really looked at me. He saw me as someone valuable. No one has ever looked at me like that before. I have spent my life being a collector of looks. People have looked at me for years, but the looks I get are always looks that are of disgust, and I'm not going to stand near her. And they saw me as nothing more than trash, something to be rolled up, thrown away, and forgotten. But this look was a look that I will never forget. Because that day, he saw me as something more. He saw my gift, the gift that I knew was the least he deserved, but it was all I had, as more. And he looked at me and he said, do you see this woman? And I waited. I held my breath. I wanted to know what he was going to say. I needed confirmation that he knew I was sorry, that he knew I was thankful, that he knew I loved him. He said, I came into your house and you didn't wash my feet, but she washed my feet with her tears and she dried them with her hair. And he said, I came in your house and you didn't offer me the customary kiss of a guest, but she has not stopped kissing my feet since she entered. And I came in and you didn't anoint my head with oil, but she